Hey everybody, it's Thursday evening and we are going to take a trip around the world. I've got about a half an hour before dinner's ready and I just realized it's been quite a while since I've done an around the world update. So I really don't feel like there's anything to talk about specifically this week, but we're going to go around and have a look at the tanks. This is basically my evening checkup on all the tanks, so we'll go around and have a checkup on all the tanks together. This one is my 29 miscellaneous. Nothing really to speak of in this tank as usual. I do need to do a water change. I topped the water off recently, but you can see the water level's getting a little bit low again. So I don't like to do more than one or two top offs. If the water level's getting low again, it's really time to get in there and do a water change. And as always with this tank, we've already got backflow coming through the middle there. And that's just almost always a result of my biological filters just getting gummed up really quickly. I'm not really sure why they get gummed up so quickly in this tank, but it's not the actual mechanical filters that get clogged up like that. It's not like it's some kind of really filthy, dirty tank. It's the biologicals in there grow like crazy, and there's really thick biological filter sponges, and they just get so gummed up with stuff that it prevents the water from flowing. So I'll get in there, do a water change, do a filter change, clean out those biological filters, and we'll be good to go. Won't have to really do anything else. I really should be getting in here as well to trim back some of this Anubias. It's getting kind of out of control. It's even getting to the point where it's interfering with some of the floating plants, and in fact we can see it's starting to stick up out of the water. So I'll be getting in here and giving it a chop down here below where these roots are, and so I'll have pre-rooted Anubias cutting. Don't forget, I do sell my plants. I know it's the time of year, it's a little difficult with the shipping and everything. We're taking a risk on whether they get too cold being shipped, but I do priority 2-day shipping or 3-day shipping, and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in any of my aquatic plants, water sprite, java fern, anything like that, check my email down below and you can have a look at that. So moving on to my 55-gallon gourami tank. If I don't knock into stuff, as I said, I just kind of walked into the room. I didn't really prepare for this. 55-gallon gourami tank. The only thing we've got going on here that's new is my coolie loaches that have been over in my quarantine tank are finally now over in this tank. It's unlikely that we'll actually get a look at them, but they did go over here. I'll put a link to the video if you didn't catch it. And I brought them over here. They changed color almost immediately upon going into the tank. They changed color once when I caught them and took them out of, well, the one changed color. The two dark ones stayed dark, but the one that had gotten really pale in my quarantine tank turned dark again, and then when I put it back in this tank, it turned pale again. So it's an interesting video. It's worth watching if you are interested in the coolie loaches or the way fish change color or anything like that. Again, I'll put a link to that one. Otherwise, I got in here and I wiped the glass down. I did use the melamine sponges that I have discovered recently, and when I say I've discovered them, it's just me personally has discovered them. It's been, long used by many other people. In fact, I've had them recommended to me quite a bit over the years. I've just never even bothered because, how good can they be? And I found out that they're amazing. So I will also put a link down below to some low dollar melamine sponges, and it'll save you a lot of money over buying the Magic Eraser, which is just a brand name for what the melamine sponges are. But in this tank, I do have one little bit somewhere right in here where there's about 1.5 inch long scratch. It was when I realized that aquarium gravel can scratch glass. It was very early in my fish keeping days, and because there's a scratch in the glass there, it always has algae growing in it, and it's really difficult to get out. I've always used my polyester batting to clean my glass and to wipe the algae off the glass. And to get the algae out of that little crack, I would have to use the tip of my finger and press on it until my fingernail was white, and back and forth, and it was just work to get that little bit of algae out of the glass. So I usually just left it there. You couldn't even notice unless you knew it was there. It was just the kind of thing that bugged me. And the other day, I didn't even intend to clean it. I was just wiping the glass down with that melamine foam. And as I went back and forth over that area a couple times, I realized that the green line vanished. With no effort, with no intention of wiping the stuff away, I was able to just wipe that green line right off the tank. Now, of course, it'll grow back. There is a scratch in the glass, and algae is still going to attach there and grow. but it's just an example of the difference that melamine sponge made versus trying to wipe the glass down with some other stuff. So that's, worthy of note in this tank. That's why the glass is looking so shiny and clean right now. I just did that yesterday along with the water change and filter change in this tank. This tank got the works. So other than that, not a lot going on in here. So we will move on to my 55-gallon tank, former T-bar tank. Not really anything to speak of in here. I haven't done anything at all this week. The last time we looked at this tank, I had chopped the Anubias way back. I'm not regretting having done that. It's recovering just fine. In fact, if you look at this cut right there, you can already see 2 little new shoots coming out where I cut that main chunk of rhizome off. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but that little dark spot between those two is the former main rhizome. It's like the diameter of my finger. It's a big chunk of Anubias that got cut out of there. And again, I still have big chunks of Anubias in the other room if anybody's interested. I will put my email down below for the Aquatic Plants if you're looking for Anubias. I've got plenty right now, and they're big pieces too. The only other thing I can think about with this tank is I've developed this weird pinkish looking, I have no idea what that is. It's right next to the remains of a mystery snail shell. You can see a little bit more of the remains of the mystery snail shell right there, that whitish material, if you can see through all that glare. And that's been in here forever. I mean, long time there's been a dead snail shell in here. I've been watching it slowly dissolve in the water. I mean, like over the years I've been watching it dissolve in the water. And now it almost looks as though the shell is cracked and broken away. And there's like some pink fleshy looking thing underneath of it. But I've been looking at that for 3 days now and it has not moved. It doesn't look like it's rotting. I have no idea what that is, and to be honest, I'm a little apprehensive about sticking my hand in there and poking it. So I'm just going to leave it alone and see what happens. I have no idea whether it's actually like meaty flesh or if it's hard, rocky material. Don't quite know what that is, so there you go. That's the only thing really that's going on in this tank is I have some mystery object that has just appeared. Hopefully it is not extraterrestrial in nature and there's not going to be any weird, duplicate fish swimming around in my tank that we don't recognize. So anyway, moving along to my 40 breeder. You can just have a glance at this tank and see that I haven't done anything to it in a while. I really, really need to get in there and do some serious gardening. I know I say that every time I look at this tank, but then I just never get around to doing it. I've done water changes. The water's fine. There's some algae growing on the glass or whatever. I don't care about that. The fish are healthy. The water conditions are fine. The tank is just overgrown like crazy, and you can barely even see in there. And it just really feels like it's time to get in there and give this tank a good haircut and once over, trim it up, make it look nice. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But other than that, nothing at all to talk about in this tank. I did have somebody suggest the other day from an older video that this is not a Crenocycla reagani. And I looked, because I always take all those kind of comments seriously. Somebody saying they don't think that's what it is, then it might be something else, then, okay. So I looked up Crenocycla reagani, and you can find a lot of different variants on what the fish actually looks like and still be called Crenocycla reagani. And I don't see any reason to believe that this is anything other than what I bought it as, which was the Crenocycla reagani. And when I asked the person if they had any, suggestions of what they thought it might be, they said they didn't, but they were pretty sure that it was not a Crenocycla reagani. So I'm sorry to say, if that person's watching this video, this is indeed a Crenocycla reagani, unless somebody can tell me otherwise and really give me a good positive idea on something that's even more looks more like this fish than that. But when I looked it up, every Crenocycla reagani I saw was similar enough to this one that I don't have any reason to question that that's exactly what that fish is. So that's all I can really think about to say on this tank. That was just a little side note from a comment I got a couple days ago, and it gave us a reason to look at that fish for a minute or two. So moving on to my tank that actually's got a few things worth talking about in at the moment. I did a really big water change and filter change yesterday. I've put a new filter on this tank recently. It's the Sun 304B. I did have the Sun 404B, which is similar but slightly different. I got rid of that. I got my good old Sun 304B. It's the canister filter I use on most of my larger tanks. I really like it, and I've had no issues with it over the years, and that's why I get it. So the first thing I noticed was very reduced water flow. And before I forget, and while we're looking at it, if you can see that little brown tan dot right there, that is one of the 4 nearite snails I added to the tank yesterday. We can see another one right there behind that power head, and I threw all 4 of them down in this corner, so we will see. But I recently realized that all this bright, shiny, green, what I thought was cyanobacteria, is actually green spot algae, and it's just grown together where all the spots have merged, and now it's just like green sheet algae. And you can actually already see some clean spots where the nearite snails have worked away. Right here, this area here, and then, of course, this area right here has all been cleaned up, and we've even got a few little spots back here where you can see where the nearite snails have already been working on it. Nearites are one of the few animals that will actually eat that green spot algae, and I got 4 of them, and, you know, I'm probably going to get more as time goes on because the nearites don't get really big. So, you know, get maybe half a dozen, 8 nearite snails in this tank, and we should keep it looking nice and clean. So in theory, there's still 2 more that we are not seeing at the moment. I did put 4 in there yesterday, and then of course we did the big water change and everything. And like I was saying about the filter, the flow was really reduced, so I assumed the filter was already clogged up, and in a way it was. The upper trays had very little. They didn't even look dirty almost, but the water I could tell was almost like bypassing and flowing up the sides. It almost like it wasn't flowing through the filter anymore. And when I pulled it all apart, I got all the way down to the bottom. What I was using for the mechanical filter in the bottom tray was one of those thick foam cutout filters that they send that fits into the tray. I had that in there and nothing else, and it was so packed with mulm and gunk and crud that the water literally just was not even flowing through it. It was flowing up the sides. It was squeezing between the trays and coming back out and through. And so that needed to be addressed. And so I cleaned that one out, and I changed it over and put regular filter material in that bottom tray. And then I didn't even replace the other trays. They were so clean, I didn't even rinse them off or anything. I just put the filter back together with that new tray in the bottom and then set it back up to go again. And when I did, I still had greatly reduced water flow, and at that point I decided I would reach down and check the intake, and indeed that was just completely covered with little bits of plant and leaf, and you know, that was completely packed. So when I wiped that away, we got nice, good, vigorous water flow again. So the other problem I noticed once everything got kicked up and stirred around, and believe me, there is a ton of mulm in this tank. It is so much stuff accumulated in this tank that when it swirled around, it really didn't get drawn up and out of the tank nearly as effectively as it should have. And what that tells me is I've got my filter intake in a bad spot. It's not getting enough water flow to it. And while it is in an area where the water sort of swirls and the stuff settles there, and that's kind of why I put it there, thinking it would kind of like a central vac, you know, all of the gunk would sort of settle right where it would get sucked out by the filter. And that's not what's happening. What's happening is some of the stuff that's settling in that one spot is probably getting sucked up by the filter, but that one spot is so small, most of what's flowing around the tank never flows into that spot, and therefore isn't getting drawn out of the tank. It's just settling to the bottom, and that's why the mulm is accumulating so quickly in this tank. So definitely going to have to be making some tweaks and fine-tune changes. I knew that all along. I said when I changed my filter over that we were going to have to do that when I changed and rescaped it and put this big log in here. I knew, you know, things were going to change and be different, and that's, you know, that's part of the hobby. Adding all this crazy amount of lighting on there is another thing that has really changed the dynamics going on in this tank. And on a final note, Before moving on, I just realized the other day that the new version of the Sun, while it does have these nice little brackets that allow you to clamp it to the back of your tank, it no longer comes with a surface skimmer. It's just the intake tube. So I don't have a surface skimmer on this tank anymore, and the Suns always used to come with a built-in surface skimmer. So that's a change they've made. They've swapped out the convenience of the surface skimmer, and now you've got the convenience of being able to mount to the back. So I don't know which one I prefer. Probably mounting it to the back, because most of my surface skimmers I have plugged up and don't use anyway. So I didn't even, well, the fact that it took me that long to even notice that there wasn't a surface skimmer on there ought to give you an idea of, how much I care about there being a surface skimmer on it. Anyway, moving on. My snail tank is still a snail tank. Not a lot going on in there. I do still have a couple little shrimp living in there, believe it or not. I saw them the other day, so they are still alive. Excuse me. My purple spotted gudgeon tank. I was looking at this tank last night, and hang on a minute, let me turn this fan off. I keep a fan blowing in here just to keep the air moving around and keeps it from getting crazy humid and whatnot, but when you get right up next to it, it's a little bit loud in the ear. So this tank is just crazy overgrown with plants. Not a lot to talk about fish-wise. There's my purple spotted gudgeon. He's doing what my purple spotted gudgeon does. Like, that's it. Take a picture and hang it on your wall if you want a purple spotted gudgeon, because that's what it's going to do if you ever own one. They just sit there and do nothing. Very, very boring fish. Really neat fish, really cool looking fish, very interesting fish, but it is a boring fish. It really is, at least in my opinion. But the tank itself is just getting crazy, out of control, overgrown. I've got roots growing everywhere. If you actually look at the filter intake, if you can see, there is a water sprite that is basically growing out of the filter intake. The roots, who knows how far up those roots go into that, but that is a water sprite growing out of the filter intake. And that's how much lower the water level is than the top. So, I mean, that gives you a pretty good idea of how long it's been since I've done any maintenance on this tank. This one is a 40 breeder, but I do have a hang on the back filter on this one, as opposed to my other two 40 breeders. Both have canister filters on them. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was saying that like that 40 breeder 55 gallon, that's kind of the cutoff line between hang on the back and canister. The 40 breeders, the Sun is a little bit big. The Sun 304B is a little bit big for a 40, but the Sun 303 is just the right size for a 40. The only problem is it's a canister filter, and they're kind of a hassle, and, don't know if a canister filter is necessarily worth it on a tank as small as a 40. Again, you can get this Whisper 60 that's good for tanks up to 60, and it's got this valve where you can actually turn the flow up or down. So even if you've got a tank where you don't want a ton of flow in it, and it's a 40-gallon tank, you can cut the flow rate back and still have a nice vigorous hang on the back without being crazy overdoing it on the filtration. So that's my purple spotted gudgeon tank. We will be doing some work on this one soon, I hope, and again, prepare for hearing about me having some plants available for sale once we get rid of, what's going on in there, because that's a lot of plants. And speaking of plants, we'll step back and take a look at the whole tank in a minute, but we may start at this end since we're here. You can probably see I need to get in there, do a little bit of maintenance on my water lilies. They're growing out of control. Crazy growing out of control. It's all growing out of control. Everything in there is just growing like nuts, including all of the grunge on the glass. And remember, this grunge right here specifically, you can see it's in that one spot. That is a combination because it's getting light from inside the tank, kind of in the open area. It's not being protected by all this vegetation. And then the normal, when I have my LED on for my Waterfall tank, it gets outside light shining on the tank too. And this area, because it's got light on both sides, just tends to grow a lot of algae. And I get a big patch of grunge going on right there too. So I need to get in here, do some serious plant trimming, do some serious glass wiping. and I don't know, maybe some serious water changing. I did a water change not too long ago on this tank, but you know, it could always use one again. It's probably been at least 2 weeks since I've done one, 10 days, 12 days, something like that. So it's due. And the fish in this tank are just so bright and vibrant. It's, you know, it's a shame the way I've got all of the lights blocked out. I mean, look how much floating vegetation is blocking that light. That's a really, really good high quality LED sitting right over all those beautiful rainbow fish. And while you can see them and they look pretty, a lot of what you're seeing is actually the light that's coming from that light. It's coming in this side and lighting these fish up in the corner. And that's why you're getting all that bright, beautiful light. If I turn that one off, it would be much more subdued like this over here, being blocked out by all those plants. So getting in there and opening that up a little bit is going to make a really, really big difference. And of course, once I get the glass cleaned off so we can see into the tank, that'll make a big difference too. So that's about it that's going on with my 125. Excuse me. My 20-gallon angelfish tank. Not a lot going on in here that I can think of either. I've done water change, wiped the glass down. I did some demonstrations with that melamine foam in this tank. You can see the glass is already starting to grow algae back on it. That is one of the things that you have to put up with if you want a tank lit up the way I light mine up. I like that light. I like it bright. I like a good high quality light with full spectrum that really makes the fish pop. You know, and there's a price you pay for that. You're going to get the algae. And I keep the fish on for about, or I keep the lights on the fish for about 12 hours a day. I usually come in about 10 o'clock in the morning and get everybody turned on. And then usually around 9 or 10 o'clock at night is when I'm in here turning the tanks off. And even though I'm not in here during the day, the lights are on all day. And it's just sort of that tropical cycle, sort of 12 on, 12 off. And I just keep it like that year round. I'm not worried about it. I know a lot of people say, oh, if you do like 6 hours a day, you know, you won't get algae growing in there. But, you know, if I just black the tanks out all the time, I wouldn't get algae either. I like to be able to just look in the tanks. I like the tanks to be on a steady, normal cycle. I like the fish to stay on a normal cycle. And having a 6-hour day is not a normal cycle. And basically, I would have to like work it around my schedule. I'd have to have the lights come on in the, you know, in the evening so I could come in here for a few hours or something. I don't know, like just a 6-hour on cycle just seems kind of weird for fish tanks. But a lot of people recommend a 6-hour on cycle. So again, 12-hour on cycle with a very, very bright, you know, that's an outdoor floodlight shining down on a little 20-gallon tank. And you're going to get algae. You know, it's just, I'm not shocked by that. I'm not confused by it. I'm not upset by it. I just deal with it because that's what I get when I put all that light on the tank. The upside, of course, is that my diamond tetras look amazing and my guppies glow blue and my bloodfin tetras look awesome, and so on and so forth. So for me, no question about it. I'm not even worried about that algae if the payoff is all the benefits of that great light and those beautiful colors. And speaking of beautiful colors, I just cleared out the coolie loaches that were in my quarantine tank the other day because I got some neons on sale at the PetSmart the other day. And neons are one of those fish that I really, really try not to put right in a tank unless it's a tank I'm more or less going to treat as a quarantine tank. If it's a new tank or if it's a tank that's only got a few fish in it or something, I'll go ahead and put neons directly in that. But for the most part, neons go directly in a quarantine tank if they're going to go into a tank that's bigger or if it's got a lot of more valuable fish in it. Neons are just little disease vectors. I don't know why, but neons are far more likely to come home with ick or some other disease on them than other fish in my experience. The only exception would be rubber lip plecos. Neons and rubber lips are my two fish that I always quarantine if I can. They just seem really, really likely to come home with ick or possibly something else, although in my experience I've never brought home anything besides ick from the pet store. But ick is definitely a concern. And lo and behold, one of those in there definitely has little white specks and flecks all over its dorsal fin and tail fin. So I don't know if that's just, you know, its coloration and markings, but we're already treating for ick just in case I actually started treating them for ick before I even saw those flecks. As I said, it's just so common for the neons to come home with ick that I just put them in a quarantine tank and start treating them for ick. Neons are little disease vectors. Again, I don't know why, but that's just been my personal experience. And if you ask around, I think you'll find that's a lot of other people's experience as well. Definitely want to quarantine your neons when you get them. So that's what's going on in my quarantine tank. My Brackish tank, let me get the forward light turned on here. My Brackish tank, nothing going on in this tank. I haven't done a water change. I haven't done anything. I did get asked the other day if I could do an update on this tank specifically, and I did say I would, and I will, but it'll just be a matter of whenever the next time I get around to doing a water change on this tank is. I topped it off not too long ago. It is due for a water change, and this is one of the tanks that has the 303 canister filter. So it's basically a scaled down. It's like a 2/3 size. It's only got 3 trays in it, but it's like a 2/3 size 304B Sun. It's identical. It's just smaller. And so I do have that on here. I've got my spray bar set up in the back, and it's just set up like a standard canister filter. So I'll get in here, do some work on that in the near future. My Java fern has broken loose and is still floating free. I'll check the salinity, the total dissolved solids. We can talk about that kind of stuff when I do my update on the tank. And I'll also get in there with my siphon, and I will clear out the graveyard of dead snail shells. That's all the remnants of Butterbean's dinners. And then, of course, I'll also get in there with my melamine sponge, and I'll wipe all that brown grunge off the glass. So I am going to do a quick update on what is left of the Waterfall tank while we're standing here. I may as well. So that is my LED, and then that's the spotlight that I have on this. So this is starting to die off, partially because I never really water it anymore, and you can see how weak and pathetic the new growth is coming out. It's got aphids on it. The aphids have made it all the way to this side now because I haven't been spraying for them. The aphids did start out over here on what remains of this sweet potato vine, but they migrated, they made their way. Now they're into my arrowhead plant. I was going to say whatever I just called that stuff. But everything's dead. I just have not gotten in here and pulled it out yet. I still think if I do pull it out and get it cleaned up, I'll be able to get in there and re-waterproof it. If nothing else, I can simply run a thick layer of rubber in right where the water flows, and we can just leave it at that. We don't necessarily have to have a bunch of plants in there making the water flow in a bunch of funny directions or doing weird stuff. We can just have some water flowing, and we'll still have a waterfall. We'll still have all that noise. We'll get all the splashing water coming down into the tank and all that good stuff. We can have the plants next to it, and you know, it'll just sort of be a toned down version. But I think it's doable. I think we can resurrect this and bring it back to being an actual flowing waterfall again. A couple little flowers tucked away in there hiding. Got some new growth coming out on that too. So everything is looking rough. My poinsettia, I stopped watering that a while ago, or I kind of water it when I think about it, but the poinsettia down there is just kind of dying off. I don't even care about that anymore. I'm kind of letting that one die off. My Rex begonia, it's just not really in the light anymore. I moved it away from the waterfall tank, and you can see how sort of scrawny and spindly that's getting. And the tank itself is a veritable sea of cyanobacteria at the moment. All the fish are healthy, with the exception of one of the gold skirt tetras that was in there. For the last week or so, I was noticing it was getting more and more bloated. And yesterday I found it in there floating dead. So I did lose one of my skirt tetras to bloat. But other than that, everybody seems healthy enough. Again, it's just the tank really needs some attention. My little tank here at the foot of it is, once again, the filter's clogged. You can see by this little dripping right there. There is still water flowing across that, but that little dripping is the amount of water flow we've got going on at the moment. And yes, I do still have shrimp living in this tank. I looked in there the other day and was in there doing a little bit of maintenance. I was cleaning out some of the duckweed. The duckweed had almost completely covered the surface, and the filter had stopped flowing as usual, and I was in there cleaning all that out. And I saw at least 3 shrimp, so there's at least 3 in there, and there might even be more. So those little ghost shrimp, they're tenacious. They tend to hang on once they get in and get established. So there you go, everybody. That was my trip all the way around the world today. We even stopped at the island in the middle. So thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget, this one here is my waterfall tank, and we will be looking at some progress to come on this tank whenever I get my butt in gear and get motivated enough to do it. So thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.